Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. God bless you. This is a devotional word for September 24th, 2024. We are in Galatians chapter 4. The Apostle Paul is talking about justification by faith, that we are made right with God through faith in Jesus Christ, not by works. He also uses the idea that we are adopted by God. We become sons and daughters of God, not in the general sense of the universal family of God, but in the adoption sense that we are brought into the family of God by faith. But we are brought into the family of God by God's grace and mercy and by his love, not by earning our way in. And he's going to use an example here and he's going to ask us to think about when a child is adopted, the child isn't adopted because they finally did enough good things to earn the father's love. They are adopted because of the love of the Father. And so he's going to be talking about inheritance, that when a child receives an inheritance, it's because it's freely given to them by the relative that's giving the inheritance, not because they earned it. And so he's likening the Christian life to adoption, because of the love and grace and mercy of the Father, and he's likening the Christian life to receiving an inheritance, something that somebody gives you freely. Once again, the big problem among the churches in Galatia, in that region, were those Judaizers that were saying you need to add these works to secure your salvation or to achieve your salvation. So I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. Paul says this: think of it this way. If a father dies and leaves an inheritance for his young children, those children are not much better off than slaves until they grow up. So when a child is young, they need parenting. They need like a nanny. They need somebody to show them how to live until they're old enough to live on their own. He says those children are not much better off than slaves until they grow up, even though they actually own everything their father had. So a young child that's going to inherit everything their father has will indeed inherit those things when they come of age. But until then, they need somebody to look after them and to keep them from being out of control and hurting themselves and hurting others. Verse 2, they have to obey their guardians until they reach whatever age their father set. And that's the way it was with us before Christ came. We were like children. We were slaves to the basic principles of this world. In other words, he's saying that the Old Testament laws had their place. They were good. They were laws of religious worship. They were laws of personal hygiene. They were laws of civic responsibility. They were laws of staying away from the wickedness of the world and not living like the Canaanites who practiced detestable things and sacrificing their children to Molech and all those kinds of things. God's law kept the people of Israel from doing those things, or that's what it was intended to do. They didn't always obey, but that was God's intention. He already loved them. They weren't earning his love, but in his love, he says, stay away from these things. But it wasn't the deepest of relationships as when Christ came. Verse 3 once again, he says, verse 2 once again, those children have to obey the guardians until they reach whatever age their father set. Verse 3, and that's the way it was with us before Christ came. When we were living under the law, Paul says, we lived by thou shalt and thou shalt not. That's the most clear way we knew to relate to God and have a relationship with God. We were like children. We were slaves to the basic principles of this world. But then he says in verse 4, but when the right time came, God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law. He's talking now about Jesus. God sent him to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law. The mentality was, to the Jewish mind, God will only love me if I do these things. And God loved them. He would discipline them if they didn't do those things, but God loved them. But Paul says here, the way you used to live, it's like you were slaves to the law. That's all you could think about. That's how you measured your life. Verse 5, once again, God sent Jesus to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. Slaves don't have a loving relationship necessarily with their master, but children always do with their parents, or at least they should. The nature of the master-slave relationship isn't built on love, it's just built on obedience. But the nature of a father-son relationship, father-daughter relationship, is to be built on love. Verse 5, once again, God sent Jesus to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. We needed to be forgiven, but we didn't earn that forgiveness. Jesus paid for us. We just received the forgiveness. Think inheritance now. It's just about receiving. Inheritance is not about earning. Inheritance is about receiving. Verse 6, and because we are his children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us to call out, Abba, Father. If you're a Christian and you have that sense of the fatherhood of God in your life, that's evidence that you belong to God the Father. You belong to God the Son, Jesus Christ. The Spirit of God dwells in you. The relationship is established through faith. Why in the world do you think you could improve on that by works? My wife and I have been married 42 years. She loves me unconditionally. Now, if I do good things, she's going to appreciate it, but she's not going to love me more or less. She loves me. I never earned her love. I never deserved her love. I just received her love. And because I received her love, it makes me want to be a better man. It makes her want to be a better woman because she received my love. Paul's saying here, hey, Galatians, we are his children. God sent his Spirit, the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us to call out, Abba, Father. Why do you think you need to improve on that? By keeping a record of your good works. Verse 7, now you are no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are his child, God has made you his heir. Eventually, what's the greatest inheritance that we're going to receive? It's going to be heaven and glorified bodies to be in the presence of God. Dear friend, we don't earn any of those things. We receive them. A child isn't adopted because he earns his way into a father's heart. The father adopts him because he loves him. And so may we not think that having begun in the flesh, having begun in the spirit, we're not made perfect in the flesh. We didn't start in the flesh. We didn't start our Christian life by being good enough. We started it by saying yes by faith. So keep saying yes to Jesus. God bless you.